The Virginia Cable Telecommunications Association and your local cable provider presents Cable Reports. Join us now as Cable Reports brings you up to date on current issues facing the Commonwealth through discussions with your local legislators and other policymakers from across Virginia.
From the General Assembly and the City of Richmond, I'm Woody Evans for Cable Reports, brought to you by the Virginia Cable Telecommunications Association and Comcast, connecting Virginians to their government. We're pleased to connect you with two members of the House of Delegates, Riley Ingram. Good to see you, sir.
Thank you, Woody. Nice to be here.
Chairman of County, Cities, and Towns
Yes,
still.
sir. Yes,
And Mr. Majority Leader, Kirk Cox. Good to see you, sir.
Woody, thanks for always having us. We appreciate the job you do. Thank you.
Little good news, revenue projections are remaining the same, so it makes your job a little easier in terms of the budget.
We didn't think that was necessarily going to be true, Woody. Sales tax is a little bit down, corporate's a little bit down, but we're pretty solid with what we call withholding and non-withholding, which is our biggest revenue source. Recordation is up some, which is good news for especially the building industry. So it sort of evens out. We generally do a mid-session reforecast, and as you say, it looks like that's not going to happen. It's going to remain the same, so that's good. It makes it a lot easier to finish the budget this week than if we had, for example, $100 or $200 million less in revenue.
What's been going on your committee, cities, counties, and towns?
Everything. We've had some controversial measures, and there's one that came over from the Senate. It's a grass cutting is always an issue, but this one showed photos because we tabled the bill over on the House side, and because they have the authority to do this now. However, this is shrubs and bushes, and that's why the subcommittee that heard that did not like it. However, there are photos. I don't know what's going to happen to it now, but we've had some interesting measures. But most of the time, I have a very good. I have two real strong subcommittees. Just two subcommittees, 10 and 11 members on each one, and they really do a great job in weeding the legislature out where it's good.
And I take it you get a lot of requests from local government because the Commonwealth is a Dillon Rule state, and
yes,
local government can only do what the General Assembly or the state allows them to do.
Right, and county, cities, and towns, everything that's local, government issues comes through county, cities, and towns. And with the Dillon Rule, the locality cannot do any more than what the General Assembly basically lets them do. So they change charter changes from time to time to change, even if it's just members of a board or a commission, and they come through us, and we grant that. Most of the time we grant the things that the locality requests.
And I think there were some important and significant transparency rule changes early in the session. Talk to us about their importance.
We had two or three, Woody, that were very important. One of the complaints in past years is the budget's the biggest document we do. It's a $109 billion two-year budget. And one of the things that you've heard a lot about on the federal level is not reading bills, et cetera. So one of the reforms is that when the budget comes out, it has to be on members' desk, and the public gets to see it for 48 hours before we vote on it.
So is that going to be put online then
Yes,
in order
sir.
to make it available to
Yes,
the public?
sir. So it'll be online. The public can look at it. We hope they will. Gives them a chance to comment on it before we take the final vote. So that's one thing. The other thing is that, it hasn't happened often, but occasionally a bill will fail and someone slips it into the budget.
Right.
And if that happens, it has to be set aside in a separate document so you can see that right away. So I think that's a good reform. And also, if the House has a budget, the Senate has a budget, and if an item is not in either budget but appears in the final conference report, that's got to be set aside. So those things will be immediately transparent. We got in a little bit of a bad habit of sometimes we would need to move a bill from one committee to the next. So on the floor, we'd actually have the committee meeting at the chairman's desk. And for small matters, but that's just not good public policy because the public's not there, no one knows what you're voting on. So the speaker said from now on, any committee meeting is going to be downstairs in the committee room where the public can see it and members can have comment, et cetera. So I think those are good reforms.
So good reforms?
Oh gosh, I tell you what, Kurt, does a great job. He and the speaker both do a great job with the floor session and with the rules, and I think that was a real good rule, because that way, by changing that, everyone would have got to come in, public could come in to announce the meeting and the whole thing.
Now, there've been some other positive developments in terms of bipartisan agreements that have been reached on some controversial issues.
Yes.
I-66 has been in the news, a big transportation project. There were a lot of people, especially in Northern Virginia, upset about that. A lot of members who had introduced bills, especially on tolling, but there's an agreement that's been reached.
Woody, that is true. And the agreement that was reached, they will have tolling, but they will have so many lanes that will not be tolled. But then the people, and I agree with that. I mean, as long as you can allow them to go a different route or something, I don't have a problem with tolls, especially when it's increasing, because traffic volume up in Northern Virginia is really, really something. And I think that the people be willing to pay, to move faster along a route that sometimes you're sitting in traffic for an hour or hour and a half at a time. And so I think that the compromise was very, very good, and I think that a compromise, everybody doesn't go away from the table happy, but it's like that's what a compromise is.
And I take it that there were some lessons learned by another project in the Hampton Roads area where people were upset because no improvements were being made in advance of tolling taking place.
Yes, so the Midtown downtown tunnels
Right.
there was a lot of people upset because the feeling is, and I think it's the right feeling, that you need to add lane capacity. And that was part of the I-66 issue inside the Beltway. Was originally it was going to be tolled with no additional lane capacity. So part of the compromise was that one of the stretches that particularly is heavily traveled, that there will be an increased capacity inside the Beltway on that lane, and that will help with the compromise. We also had one that, as you mentioned, compromises on Second Amendment,
Yes.
which was a big one. And once again, a little give and take on both sides. The Attorney General basically sort of ruled that at least 25 states that had reciprocity agreements with us on concealed weapons, where you could, if you're a Virginia resident, you could take your concealed weapon to Michigan or North Carolina. He ruled those weren't close enough to our law, so they were no longer in effect. So the compromise, and a lot of people were upset by that because they didn't want to obviously be in violation of a law if they went to a different state. So the compromise was that now, basically those reciprocity agreements will be allowed, and frankly, any state that has a concealed weapons permit will be allowed. So it's expanded. But having said that, the compromise the other way is if you have a gun show, you're just a private dealer, then a state policeman will be there in case you want to run something through the background check. That's only required for federally licensed dealers now. Then on the domestic violence front, and there are several types of protective orders, so you have to be a little careful with this. There are like 3 types, but the most restrictive type, after you've had due process, if you violate that protective order, this bill would say you cannot have a gun. So that was sort of the compromise. I think was well done. And so in those 2 areas, me and you've talked a lot about this. We have some good compromises in veterans. So everybody always talks about the tension between the various branches, but there's some good things going on too.
Good compromise on concealed weapons permit?
Yes, Woody, very much so, because I had people call me when the Attorney General first ruled on this, and I had 2 different calls. One was a lady that travels back and forth to Florida. Her husband is stationed there in the military, and she went back and forth, and she said that the only state, I think she said the only state was Georgia or something that she went through that she actually had to take the weapon and put it on the seat. She said, but I'm so glad that this compromise works now for her or anyone else traveling as far as that goes. And so I think it was a very good compromise.
Now, you always have some interesting legislation. A lot of it is generated by constituents, and I think there was a problem brought to you as a result of someone suffering an illness at a restaurant.
Yes, and Woody, that bill just went up in smoke. It didn't go anywhere. The Restaurant Association was opposed to it, and they had some good points and also some other points that I didn't agree with, but they said that anyone that is allergic to seafood or something, they could ask the restaurant waitress or whatever if they cooked in the same oil. So, so I said, okay. So they ended up tabling the bill. But it was still nice to, I tried to represent the people, and if they request me to put something in, I put it in. Woody, let me tell you another one that was somewhat of a really emotional thing. This gentleman that lives in my district, he had I think it was a godson, that anyway, he served like 2 or 3 or more tours in Iraq and Afghanistan, combat infantry badge. He came back to the United States, and he was actually killed in training. And he wanted the name on the war memorial. Well, they have strict rules as to you have to be killed in combat in order to have your name on the war memorial. Well, anyway, I did put it in by request, and he testified. There were other people that spoke against the bill, and so they carried the bill over. And the reason for it is because they want him to go through the process to see. They have a commission. What's it called, Kurt?
The Joint Leadership Commission, which are the 22 veterans groups.
Right.
Like the
They rule. And he went before them before, but they did not make a ruling. So he figured that they probably would agree with him. Well, what the committee decided was for him to go back through that process, and if they approved the process, then of course it could be done. But that was a very emotional thing because
Sure.
it was unique. But the problem with it is if you open this up, 2 gentlemen from Hopewell, in fact, Herschel, that's in the General Assembly, his commanding officer was Robert Doubt from Hopewell. Bobby Doubt and Pee Wee Jones were in a Corvette drag racing on Route 10. He had been in Vietnam, I know, twice, okay, and infantry the whole